Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. In the vast and turbulent history of China, the Huang Chao rebellion stands out as a particularly tragic and poignant chapter. It began under the banner of fighting for the people, but soon descended into a hellish inferno of blood and fire. Among its many horrors, one woman left behind a long poem titled Qin Fu Yin, the Lament of Lady Qin, which allows us a rare glimpse into the harshest and most brutal realities of that chaotic era. It is more than a war epic, it is a dirge for the ordinary people. In the year 880 AD, during the late Qing Dynasty, chaos engulfed the realm. The rebel army led by Huang Chao breached the capital city of Chang'an. This once prosperous imperial metropolis was suddenly transformed into a vision of hell. Huang Chao proclaimed that he would overthrow the corrupt Tang regime and save the common people. At first, the citizens of Chang'an held on to a glimmer of hope, believing that this army might bring a new order. However, reality soon shattered their illusions. Once Huang Chao's troops entered the city, discipline collapsed rapidly. The soldiers began looting, killing, and committing every imaginable atrocity. According to the New Book of Tang, the rebels ransacked valuables, slaughtered officials, and even targeted members of the royal family. Chang'an was consumed by flames and smoke, the streets filled with screams and the stench of blood. Wealthy households tried to preserve their lives by offering up their singing girls and maidservants to the rebels, while impoverished families abandoned their newborns, and even young girls were not spared. A heavy cloud of despair settled over the entire city. Amid this chaos, one man silently recorded it all with his pen. His name was Wei Zhuang, a scholar who had traveled to Chang'an to take the imperial exams. Trapped in the fallen city, he had no escape. Facing the horror before him, Wei Zhuang chose not to flee, perhaps because there was nowhere to run. Instead, he picked up his brush and transformed all he had witnessed into a 1,666-character-long poem, which later became known as Qin Fu Yin. The central figure of Qin Fu Yin is a woman named Lady Qin. Though a fictional creation of Wei Zhuang, she represents the countless ordinary people struggling to survive in the chaos. In the poem, Lady Qin narrates her own story in the first person. Her tone is calm yet filled with sorrow, as if recounting to future generations a past too painful to remember. She recalls how she was born into a wealthy family and lived peacefully in Chang'an. Each morning, she would lean against carved railings, teaching the family parrot to speak. Life was poetic and serene. But this peace was shattered the day Huang Chao's army attacked the city. It was the 5th day of the 12th lunar month in the first year of Zhanghe. That morning, dust rose outside the city walls, and the deafening sound of war drums echoed. Tang soldiers marched out to confront the rebels, while terrified citizens rushed about in panic. Lady Qin's father returned with dreadful news. Emperor Shizong had fled the city, retreating to Bashu. Chang'an was on the verge of collapse. Soon after, Huang Chao's army surged into the city like a tidal wave. White rebel banners fluttered atop the walls, and the streets were filled with cries and bloodshed. Lady Qin witnessed Chang'an's transformation into hell on earth. Flames devoured the palace, blood flowed through the streets like rivulets, and cries of despair echoed from all directions. Women from noble families were surrendered to the rebels, infants from poor homes were abandoned. Some were even forced to eat human flesh. In her poem, Lady Qin bitterly laments, "The sun sets in the cold white light, yet heaven remains silent." She questioned the heavens, if they could see all this suffering, why remain indifferent? As the poet of Qin Fu Yin, Wei Zhuang portrayed the horrors of Chang'an with exquisite detail. Rather than describing Huang Chao's actions directly, he depicted the suffering of the common people through Lady Qin's eyes, their helplessness, their struggle for survival. For instance, he wrote, "In Dingling there was a girl, newly grown into beauty, unmatched in grace, yet taken by force onto a rebel's chariot. She returned home weeping, unable to meet her husband's eyes. This was the fate of a young woman from Dingling, abducted and violated by the rebels. Upon returning to her husband, she was too ashamed to look at him. Another newlywed from Nanling was killed the day after her wedding. Her family, overwhelmed with grief, threw themselves into a well. These descriptions are harrowing in their realism and emotional weight. Wei Zhuang also detailed the chaotic nature of Huang Chao's forces. The rebel soldiers wore tattered clothing and marked their faces with tattoos to show off their battlefield exploits. Their commanders behaved strangely, wore disorderly garb, yet adorned themselves with ornate hairpins. At night, they slept in their armor without even removing their clothes. The so-called three ministers they appointed had no understanding of court rituals or governance. They would put on a show at court by day, then drink and revel at night, plunging the city into lawlessness. Yet Wei Zhuang did not write with pure condemnation. He also noted, objectively, that when Huang Chao first entered the city, his forces maintained strict discipline and vowed not to harm the people. But within days, the army spiraled out of control, and even Huang Chao himself could not rein them in. This account aligns with the Old Book of Tang, demonstrating Wei Zhuang's level-headed observation as an eyewitness. In wartime Chang'an, the suffering was far from over. As Huang Chao's army ravaged the city, word arrived with a glimmer of hope. Tang Imperial forces had recaptured Qishui town, just a short distance from Chang'an. From there, soldiers could reach the capital by nightfall. News of this rekindled the hope of the people, who began to look forward to the rebels' downfall. Yet once again, reality dealt them a cruel blow. According to historical records, the Tang court assembled allied forces from various regional military governors in an attempt to retake Chang'an. Upon hearing the news, Huang Chao hastily withdrew. However, these military governors were themselves warlords entrenched in their own territories, with poorly disciplined troops. After entering Chang'an, instead of rescuing the civilians, they began a new wave of plundering. Even worse, some local thugs took advantage of the chaos by posing as Tang soldiers to loot and pillage. The people, having just escaped the clutches of Huang Chao's army, now fell into the tiger's den of the Tang forces. The streets were filled with marauding soldiers and the howls of wild dogs, and the situation in Chang'an grew even more chaotic. To make matters worse, Huang Chao's army had not gone far. While the Tang troops indulged themselves in looting the city, Huang's forces launched a surprise counterattack, killing several Tang generals. Many Tang soldiers, unwilling to abandon their spoils, were pursued and slaughtered. The citizens of Chang'an, fueled by fury, pelted the retreating rebels with stones and even collected arrows to aid the Tang army. But when Huang Chao's troops entered Chang'an a second time, they exacted brutal revenge on the populace. This massacre was later recorded in history as the cleansing of the city, leaving corpses strewn across the streets and blood flowing like rivers. The Tang army changed tactics and laid siege to Chang'an, aiming to cut off the rebels' food supply. However, this strategy not only placed Huang Chao's troops in a dire situation, it also doomed the civilians inside the city. In The Lament of Lady Qin, Wei Zhuang wrote, "On every side, cruel traps lie thick, one dough of grain, worth its weight in gold." The price of food skyrocketed, one dough of grain became more precious than gold. The rebels may have resorted to cannibalism to survive, the Tang generals' kitchens at least had tree bark to boil. But the ordinary people could only starve to death. Corpses filled the city's drains, and once glorious Chang'an was reduced to complete ruin. In Wei Zhuang's depiction, Chang'an's former splendor had vanished. Markets were overgrown with weeds, the apricot orchards had been cut down, the willows along the Jade Canal were gone, lavish mansions had turned to rubble. He wrote, "Silken hems turned to ashen gray, noble corpses trampled on the palace steps." This line described the ruins of the imperial palace, once gilded halls now reduced to ashes, the remains of aristocrats crushed underfoot in what was once the grandeur of empire. At the poem's end, Lady Qin's narrative takes a sudden turn. She recounts leaving the city through the eastern gate, beginning her journey of escape. Why was she able to leave Chang'an so easily? Scholars speculate that this may have occurred after the Tang army finally recaptured the city. Lady Qin, possibly forced to collaborate with the rebels, might have been branded a traitor. To avoid punishment, she chose to flee. Her escape was marked by desolation. She described the landscape outside the city as desolate as the frontier, thickets and brambles lined the roads, and once bustling streets were now eerily empty. She wandered aimlessly, lost in confusion. Upon passing a shrine, she questioned the deity Jin Tianshan, asking why it remained indifferent to the suffering of the world. To her surprise, the god responded with a sigh, saying that even divinity had lost its power due to lack of worship and offerings, and could no longer save the people. The deity, too, would retreat into the mountains. Lady Qin, upon hearing this, felt a strange sense of relief. If even the gods were powerless, then to whom could the living cry for help? Continuing her journey, Lady Qin reached the outskirts of Luoyang, where she met an old man curled up among the reeds. With tears streaming down his face, he recounted his story. Once a wealthy landowner with granaries and estates, he had been robbed by both Huang Chao's rebels and the Tang forces. Now, he survived by foraging wild plants during the day and sleeping in the reeds by night. Moved to tears, Lady Qin realized that her hopes of finding refuge were in vain. Though the world was vast, there was no place left to call home. In despair, she encountered a traveler from Dingling. He told her that since Huang Chao's invasion of the Central Plains, the southern region of Jiangnan had remained relatively peaceful. There, bandits had been eradicated, and officials ruled with compassion, treating the people like their own children. Life was stable. Upon hearing this, a faint hope ignited in Lady Qin's heart. She resolved to journey to Jiangnan, regardless of life or death. If she must perish, she would rather die on peaceful soil. She mocked herself, saying that though she had grown up in the imperial capital, she now envied even the ghosts of Jiangnan. At the poem's close, Lady Qin ends her account with a song. May you raise your oar and head eastward, this eternal song I offer to you, my lord. She urged people to sail east and seek life in Jiangnan. The poem not only recorded the suffering of a chaotic era but also conveyed a yearning for peace and hope. Wei Zhuang's The Lament of Lady Qin struck a powerful chord due to its raw emotional force. However, its stark portrayal of reality deeply offended the Tang court. Under pressure, Wei Zhuang destroyed all copies of the poem and even left a will requesting that future generations never recite it. Yet miraculously, one line, silken hems turned to ashen gray, noble corpses trampled on the palace steps, survived, preserved in books such as Beimeng Suoyan, Miscellaneous Records of Northern Dreams. The poem lay dormant for 1,000 years, until 1900, during the 26th year of the Guangxu Emperor's reign, when the sealed library cave at Dunhuang's Mogao Caves was discovered. Taoist monk Wang Yuanlu, while cleaning the grottos, accidentally found a secret chamber filled with tens of thousands of ancient manuscripts. Among them was a fragmentary copy of The Lament of Lady Qin. These manuscripts were soon taken overseas by foreign explorers like Orelstein and Paul Pelliot. In 1920, Chinese scholar Wang Guowei, while reading a Japanese copy of the Dunhuang manuscripts, came upon that preserved line and was astonished. He realized that this might indeed be the legendary lost poem, thus uncovering a forgotten piece of history. The Lament of Lady Qin is more than a poem, it is a mirror reflecting the cruelty of the late Tang era and the complexities of human nature. With his pen, Wei Zhuang documented the suffering of ordinary people and laid bare the merciless nature of war. Though the Huangchao rebellion marched under the banner of justice, it brought only destruction and slaughter. Meanwhile, the Tang army's suppression of the rebellion only deepened the people's misery. Whether rebels or imperial troops, both became executioners of the masses during that age of chaos. Lady Qin's story shows that even in the darkest times, someone had the courage to leave behind the truth through words. Wei Zhuang chose not to remain silent. He risked everything to compose the Lament of Lady Qin, allowing future generations to glimpse that era of blood and tears. And Lady Qin, though fictional, represents countless ordinary souls who struggled in chaos. Her resilience and hope remain deeply moving to this day. This is History and Culture Channel. Like and subscribe are the biggest help and support for us. Thank you everyone. See you next time.